Hello, I'm Matt Marshall, founder and editor-in-chief of VentureBeat, and I'm excited to share a new podcast project we've been working on. We're calling it Beyond the Pilot, Enterprise AI in Action. At VentureBeat, we have conversations every day with leaders and teams across various industries to bring you coverage about the latest in enterprise AI. And from my vantage point, the conversation has really started to change from, can I dream as big as I can, to a question of, hey, can I actually just build something that's sustainable and really works for me? That race to scale, fueled by supposedly never-ending cloud resources, is colliding with brutal realities of physics and finance and ROI. Let's be honest, over the last 6 months, I bet your AI playbook has become outdated. I've teamed up with my friend Sam Witteveen, who's a developer and a leader in AI coverage, to dive into what real companies, industry leaders, and decision makers are actually doing, and to learn about their experiences putting AI into action. We're hoping to uncover what they've done wrong, what they've done right, and how they've overcome real problems as they move beyond the pilot. So I think your task is really to listen for those trade-offs. There's not one single answer. You're going to have to gather intelligence for your playbook. And the space is moving really quickly. We're going to keep up with that conversation. So thank you for listening. Here's the first episode.
This is VentureBeat's Beyond the Pilot, Enterprise AI in Action. I'm Sam Witteveen.
I'm Matt Marshall.
Today's episode is presented by Outshift by Cisco, Cisco's emerging tech incubation engine and driver of agentic AI, quantum, next-gen infra, and beyond. Today we're talking with Ryan Nystrom, who's helped build some of the products that have defined the mobile era at places like Instagram. He's also created a bunch of popular iOS libraries. And Ryan currently leads the AI team at Notion that has recently built Notion 3.0 for agents. So this is creating agents right inside the second brain that's used by millions of users. For us, what makes Notion's story so compelling is that they weren't an AI native company. They're injecting this new intelligence into a product that people have been relying on for a number of years already. Ryan's been on the front lines discovering the differences between trying to teach your AI a complex system versus getting your system to speak the AI's language. Welcome to the pod, Ryan. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to jump into some of the things we did on Notion's AI and agent systems.
So I kind of think that you've got a really interesting sort of perspective in, like I mentioned in the intro, you've got this history in the mobile era, and you worked at sort of one of the premier sort of companies that took mobile to the next level, kind of thing, being Instagram. Not only that, along the way, you built a bunch of sort of well-known iOS libraries. With that, you were very involved in that community. I'm kind of interested to sort of get a little bit of your history of how you thought about that back then, and then how did that transition into where you are now at Notion?
Yeah, I got my start basically in engineering and coding because of mobile, because of the iPad and the iPhone. I was just kind of wowed by this technology that I could not only take with me, but also like touch and interact with. And that's what really got me excited. I also really felt like back when I was getting started in like 2010, 2011, we were in the middle of this like revolution where everything was switching to mobile. And one of my first really big tech job was working at Instagram and kind of riding that wave of everyone. I mean, Instagram being owned by Facebook, where people were migrating from doing things on their computer on Facebook to sharing and socializing on their phone. And I found that really exciting. I wanted to build product. I wanted to build tools. I wanted to build things that people could touch and use. And what really gets me excited about this time in AI is I'm feeling the same sort of like wow and like magic with these tools. Comparing like LLMs today, which are already extremely advanced, with things like GPT-5 and Sonnet 4.5, which are kind of the latest and greatest frontier models. It's almost like you compare these to when I got started with iPhone. It was like the iPhone 4. It wasn't the first gen. It wasn't the iPhone 1, which like was kind of magic, but like was super limited, didn't have an app store or anything. And we went through these different phases of the iPhone where they got faster, sleeker, more powerful. Got the App Store. You had more SDKs, more APIs, and more things that you could do. Then we had more hardware like the iPad, the watch. And I feel like this is kind of happening again in the industry with LLMs and with AI. We're getting tool calling. We're getting more and more features. Like the companies are building their own versions of like app stores and computer use and browsers and all these things. Um, and we don't know exactly like where this is going to go, but we see the value in the technology. And so we're all just trying to like build things and figure out how to like make this work for us. As somebody who writes code, like it's become like immensely valuable to my workflow. And now we're trying to like expand that value to like everyday tasks. And that's what I'm trying to do here at Notion as well. Like we have this platform, we have this product. How can we bring that sort of joy and magic that we're experiencing on the engineering side to this productivity software?
So that's super interesting that you're starting to see this explosion, like you mentioned, originally from the mobile era, now this AI era. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in Notion, where sort of Notion was perhaps with their AI journey when you first arrived?
Yeah, it's a little funny. I was doing a startup with one of my great friends and co-founder, and we were trying to build. We have this sort of like vendetta against Slack. I think that Slack can be like
I think a
so
lot of people have that.
distracting.
Yeah.
This is a kind of a fault of my own. Like the pings and the badges and the alerts happen, and I'm like eager to go help people and unblock, but I'll end my day having been like, "Oh my god, I've just been in Slack all day, like, I didn't write any code." So we were building this startup to try and solve some of that problem. It was more of like a writing-focused, product, but still was for, like, async remote work. And we did our startup for a few years. It never got, like, the traction that we wanted, and, at the time, the the sort of irony is that, like, on our website at one time, we had, like, "You should not use Notion. You should use our software instead." And that, like, I think put us on each other's radars. And when our startup wasn't working, we reached out to some folks at Notion and found out that like, oh, this actually would be kind of share the same like design language and product philosophy. And found a great home and opportunity over here. And originally we were not even going to come to work on AI because we had been working on like workplace comms and communication and stuff. But as soon as we joined, there was this sort of resurgence into Notion's AI tools and systems, and there was a lot of experimental stuff going on at the time, and it was very experimental and innovative in terms of like the way we were using LLMs and AI, but we needed to put some like product finesse on it. And my co-founder, Brian Levin, is a designer. I'm an engineer. Both of us are like product people as well. And so we were able to join this like extremely technical project and put like a product lens on it. And we went through a bunch of different iterations of what it should have been. We were exploring crazy stuff like code gen within Notion and all these really wild automations. They were incredibly impressive. And from that, we discovered this sort of like agentic loop and tool calling loop that worked really, really well. And we leaned really hard into that. And that is eventually what became our Notion 3.0 moment that we announced at Make with Notion this year.
Ryan, and very interesting. We want to get further into that product, obviously. Going back to briefly to the experience you had during the mobile era, right? You mentioned that feeling of being on the bleeding edge again, of chasing
Hmm.
new APIs. One of the things about mobile though is you built software and you had the iOS system and platform. It worked, right? That was the beauty of iOS. Obviously, Android was a competitor. How is building that stochastic, non-deterministic AI product different when you go back to that era of excitement? How is it different now from that deterministic world where things worked, right? The traditional software, mobile engineering background that you have.
I still really struggle with this, because I've got, over a decade of, like, I almost wanna, like, traditional software engineering experience where I'm like, it's extremely deterministic. When I write code that expects this output, like, it is so simple to understand, debug. Um, there were When I started working with AI at our former startup, we were doing a little bit of AI stuff, and then coming here, um, I really had to, like, rewire myself to, like, understand how to work with these things. And one of my, like, key moments was when I was working with, one of our co-founders at Notion, Simon, um, said something about, was giving me feedback on, like, a code change that I was making, a prompt change, and he was like, "Describe this as you would describe to an intern." And I was like, "Well, like, I'm trying to, like, codify the rules of how this, like, LM should behave in this condition." And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, but, like, these are trained on, like, content generated by people, and so they are going to, like, understand or reason better like people will." And that was just like a light bulb moment to me that I was like, "Oh, man, I'm really, like," it's almost like an organic thing, like, I'm, like, talking to it and explaining to it. And really, now, whenever I'm, like, working with AI, I will, like, reread the prompts and tool descriptions and all these things and be like, "Is this something that I could give to a person with, like, no context, and they could somewhat understand what's going on? If not, then it's gonna do a bad job." Um and that's, like, fun because there's, like, so much logic that can be baked into just, like, English instructions. It's also, like, as a traditional software person, like, kind of horrifying because sometimes things work in ways that are incredibly unpredictable. Um, they can go sideways, they can interpret things differently, and then you add into the mix, like, different models, that, like, have their own preferences and behaviors and, like, training data built in. So I find it, like, very, like, weird, but in a fun way. Like, it's really fun weird, because you can end up doing a lot of, like, really interesting, quirky things, with LLMs.
This series is presented by Outshift, Cisco's emerging tech incubation engine and driver of the Internet of Agents, an open, interoperable internet for agent-to-agent collaboration. Learn more about the Internet of Agents and explore how agentic systems are the future at outshift.cisco.com.
And Ryan, where do you feel like we are on that journey, right? I think there's a sense that we're obviously scaling the models. Um, there's improvement through reinforcement learning, right? There's the reasoning. There is this trajectory, but there's also kind of this brewing discontent with hallucinations and the limits of that reasoning, right? There was talk of AGI, right? AGI was around the corner. That's all disappeared as you join the company and where you are, where you feel things are now. Can you give us a sense of where we are on that journey?
I really feel, using, this, like, mobile comparison, it's almost like we're in the, like, Palm OS era. We're, like, pre-BlackBerry, pre-iPhone, It's like I think it is so early. Um, I think that there's a lot of valid criticism of what LLMs and especially, like, agentic systems are capable of, and that's one thing that I think we've learned the hard way building, not even just the current version of Notion AI, but, like, the previous iterations of it. And the thing that gets me excited, though, is, like, the pace of change is, like, so fast that, it'd be almost like if there were plenty of people who, like, poo-pooed the Palm Pilot, and we're like, this is like going nowhere. Like it can barely like detect my like handwriting when I'm like doing the like notation on it. But like look where we are now. I mean, look how much has changed in what, 30 years? Like less. Um, I think that like there's a lot of comparisons, and I think that things are moving like even faster because like GPT-3 was like a couple years ago, and that was like okay. I mean, GPT-4 to I think a lot of us was like the breakthrough moment, and that even compared to what things can do now, which is like a year and a half later or something. I mean, it's crazy. This stuff is changing so fast.
Do you find it's different this time though, in that like before you kind of had to pick your camp, right? You were either iOS or you were Android, right? And you
Ooh.
would never go from one to the other kind of thing, right? We but now people, it's almost like people are, happily changing models every week kind of thing, or if not even sooner. So I'm curious to sort of get your take on how do you see the differences between say an open AI with the GPT models, the Claude models from Anthropic, perhaps Google, or the other Chinese companies, etc.
I I love that. I remember when I got like very into mobile, I was just like diehard Apple, like Android sucks. It's never gonna be that good. And working on Instagram, we had like a handful of iOS engineers and we had a handful of like Android engineers. And like we very like the cultures were so different, the people were so different. Though the fun fact is that like probably 9 out of 10 Android engineers used an iPhone. So like I think that iPhone was clear was clearly the choice. Anyways, but what I love about the current state of things is that um, these like frontier models are competing with each other, or not the models, but like these frontier research labs are competing with each other, and they are learning from each other. They are innovating. They are sharing information. They're also like keeping um, some of their biggest innovations, secret and stuff. And I just think that this competition is really good for the industry. For us at Notion, we benefit because these frontier labs are trying to like build the best model and they're trying to outcompete each other. And then we are just going to use the one that fits our needs the best. And so we are constantly evaluating the new models. We pretty much are staying in the like Anthropic and OpenAI camps. That's what's just worked out best for us. We'll always play with new models as they come out. Um, but it is quite different. You will get some people that are like, oh, GPT-5 like picks up on my writing style, or it's got a way of doing tool calling that's preferable to me. And I think that that's great. But I also notice the way that these are changing so quickly. Sonnet 4.5 came out like a month and a half ago or something, and it like one of our biggest issues with Sonnet 4 is it would only do tool calls kind of like one at a time and wouldn't do them in parallel very often. And 4.5 is all of a sudden just like, I'll do as many tools at once as I think is necessary. And that was like a huge leap forward. Now I'm like, oh, Sonnet 4.5 is like pretty great now. And so, and I even see that on like the tools that I use. Like I will flip flop between Claude Code and Codex pretty regularly based on uh, either model innovations or even just like product innovations. And so it is cool that I don't think people are stuck in one camp very much. There was such a clear difference between like Apple or like iOS and Android. Like there were just things that one prioritized over the other. Android being like very open, iOS being like closed, but also like super polished, super performant. That's changed nowadays. I think they're both pretty comparable, or even inverted a little bit. But yeah, on the model side, um, yeah, I see less like the fiefdoms. It's not like here at Notion we have a camp of Anthropic engineers and OpenAI engineers. We all just use LLMs.
Ryan, you described Notion's journey into Gen AI as almost an accident built on years of prior work. Can you unpack the pre-existing ingredients, like search, connected apps, and the collaborative editor that Notion had that became the foundation for your agent?
Yeah, yeah. I know it wasn't like an accident that we created this agentic Notion AI, but like when I kind of replay how we got here, it almost feels like the stars aligned. So like Notion's history, briefly, because I've only been here, 1 year out of, I think Notion's been around. I mean, Notion as like a company, with the co-founders has been around for like 13 years. In its current form, I think since 2016, 2017. But essentially Notion started as like wikis and pages, like sort of like collaborative docs. They added databases, so you could do more project management, and then added things like connected apps where I could connect, say, GitHub, Slack. There's a whole bunch of different connections, but those are the two that I use a ton. Um, and then I can both like embed content within Notion from those apps. And then we started like indexing and ranking content from those apps so that I could be within Notion, search for what's one that I love doing. Oh, like what's the Wi-Fi in the New York office? And I can like search within content that's already in Notion. But like if that conversation about the Wi-Fi password was also on Slack, our search tools could go out into like the Slack content and find it and then present it to you. And now we can actually use AI to do this like retrieval, augmented generation. You can ask the AI a question, and then we could generate, say, like 5 different queries or questions for like what you asked, and then go out into our indexes, our vector stores, and like go find the content that like closely matches that base. And that content could come from GitHub, it could come from Slack, and of course, it can be within Notion itself. And then we can take all of that information, give it back to an LLM, and then like ingest and find the answer that you're looking for. And so we ended up building this system, which is what we'll call it Deep Find or Enterprise Search. And so that shipped, I think that shipped like 2 years ago. And then we built this with GPT-4. We built Writer, we built an assistant within Notion, and so we start building these, like, foundational pieces of using AI within Notion, and then fast forward to, like, this year, we essentially have all of these parts built. We have the core primitives of Notion. We have a rich collaborative workspace, also rich with like permission checking, and those sort of things. We have this block structure in Notion that's like highly composable. And then we have this advanced search functionality, and we have the ability to write with AI. We have like all of this stuff. And so it was like a matter of seeing that all of these pieces already existed in some form and then building a system that can bring them all together, which is what we essentially call our Notion agent. And so we would build tools that connect to all of these different parts, tools like search, tools like writing to a page, querying a database, all of these sort of things. So yeah, it was really like we were able to pull together years of work, research, learnings, technology, and then assemble it into our current agent.
Ryan, walk us through maybe if you can remember what it felt like. So you joined about a year ago. It's some change, plus or minus. Um, so Notion has all these connectors, right? They've been clearly working on Gen AI, tracking the Gen AI revolution. You're coming in, as you said, from the startup, right? With actually
Hmm.
not necessarily being on the bleeding edge of Gen AI, right? You're you're
Not at all.
trying to you're trying to kill Slack or something. So can you walk us through that founder conversation and what it felt like? Because essentially, it sounds like you came on to actually build the agent. You said something about how there were maybe 2 people there working on the project. Could you walk us through what that felt like?
It really felt like being tossed into the deep end, um, because my co-founder and I had to learn not only AI, we had to learn agentic systems, And we had to learn like Notion at the same time. Like Notion is a huge code base. It's a huge code base. It's pretty complex. Um, I think that like the block system, the permission system, the real time system, and not to mention we launched offline this year, which has its own like CRDT or conflict resolution data type system. We had to contend with like all of this stuff. We had to learn all of this stuff and learn how to like most effectively use AI, and be like, what is a good product here? So it was really like having to figure out a bunch of very complicated pieces at once. But what I've loved is that Notion's like a very prototype forward company. And the stage that things were at was like really innovative and exciting, but also like very cobbled together. And I felt really free to just like go in and play and like break things, change things. And more or less like that culture is still like in the AI team. I mean, we don't kind of like break and hack at the core agent that now that we've like fully launched it, but all the things that we're trying to build onto it or extend with it or like that's very much like the culture still. But it was honestly like crazy. I had no idea what I was doing. It was super complicated. It took me a while to like ramp up and feel comfortable, but it was a matter of just kind of like powering through it and like trying things. I also think that like AI is still like in its infancy. And so even though I felt like tons of imposter syndrome, nobody else really knew what they were doing. I mean, we were all just trying to figure this out and like push it to its limits. And so I was able to play into my strengths, which is like product engineering. And so even though I'm not an AI expert, I can use an AI feature and pretty intuitively figure out like, is this good? Like, is this solving a problem for me? And so I leaned into that really hard.
It definitely sounds, Ryan, that like this was a real sort of aha moment of where you kind of realize that LLMs are all about context, right? What you put into them, agents, the same sort of thing, and Notion's sitting on this gold mine of context. Right, that whether that's your personal notes in there, whether like you mentioned that the connectors to GitHub, connectors to other things. I How do you sort of like? Can you tell us a little bit about like was that a moment that you sort of realized that? What were sort of the experiments that sort of showed, oh, we've got all this really good structured data in the blocks and stuff like that, and perhaps unstructured data from other sources?
This was a huge moment for us. Like I mentioned, we were experimenting with like really advanced stuff, like doing code generation and all sorts of kind of wild things to help like automate workflows and whatever. And that has essentially morphed into this like custom agent product that we previewed like a month ago. But what was really, really exciting for us is we realized that we could just like search and stuff all of this context into the prompt or like the transcript that we're giving the model, and it was just really good at tool calling like based on that context. And I think one of the like aha moments for us was when we realized we could get rid of a lot of like complicated modeling of our data, um and just like break things down into really simple terms for the model. And I'll give you a good example. Our prior version of Notion AI that we called like the assistant, that lived in the bottom right corner, we'd experimented with fine tuning model on top of frontier models. We'd experimented with pretty complicated rendering of like data within Notion. Like we would use JSON in some places and XML in some places, and the models would like do fine. But anytime you're doing this like bespoke structuring of data, you like have to include instructions about like what this is, and you have to like explain it. And a key moment for us was we were trying to figure out how to represent like a page and page content, which is this very complex tree of blocks. And like we had this moment where we were like, what if we just try to figure out how to present this as Markdown? Like models are trained on lots and lots of Markdown. We see all these tools and startups that can represent web pages as Markdown. We're like, what if we just represent a Notion page as Markdown? And we played with it, and the models were like so good. And we had like no instructions because all of that context and reasoning about what Markdown is and how to read it, how to understand it, and then most importantly, like how to edit it is like all baked in. And we had this moment where we were like, oh, we should just use the models how they were like meant to be used. Like it's almost like these native capabilities are built into them. And so then we ended up like rewriting a lot of our systems to be like to the model incredibly stupid. Like Markdown, JSON, and that's like about it. Like let's not overcomplicate this. The hard part then came to that like middleware layer where like how do you actually represent a very complex page block tree as Markdown? And then on like the flip side of that, how do you let the agent write changes to a like Markdown file and then translate that to the very complicated like block structure within Notion? And that's like honestly where a majority of our work went is like that sort of translation layer, moving in and out.
Do you look at that as the secret sauce? Like, it sounds really interesting that once you kind of realize that, oh, we've been trying to force the model to do something it didn't want to do, but once we realized we got Markdown, it's just happy to go along with it. Is then the secret sauce actually you sort of writing those parsers, those sort of systems to be able to go from Markdown back to the blocks? And I will sort of say I've actually written some code of writing blocks, and it was a real pain a couple of years ago when I did it. So I can sort of relate to that, quite a lot. But is that something that you sort of see as the secret sauce of this sort of intermediate middleware kind of thing?
I think so. I think that another a really important learning from all of this is that we as human beings, like I look at Notion and I don't see blocks and tree structures and all of this stuff. I just see words on a page. And so for me to effectively communicate with an LLM about that content, the model needs to like, I'm air quoting, see, it needs to see that content almost the same way that I can see it. So that when I say rewrite this paragraph or like change these bulleted lists to like numbered lists, it's incredibly obvious to the model like what I'm talking about and like what my intent is. And so I do think that this sort of representing Notion in a like LLM native way, like is kind of the secret sauce to what makes Notion AI really good. I also think it's why like coding agents are so good. It's because they're just working with like the file system. Like here is a text file essentially, and like the model has tools to interact, like read the text file, search for text files, and make changes to text files. You don't want to over instruct a model about like, here's what to do when the file is Python, here's what to do when the file is TypeScript, because the more detail and the more instruction, the more chance for confusion and error. So yeah, we spend an enormous amount of time just trying to keep our instructions and our representation of Notion data as simple as possible.
So Brian, it makes a lot of sense. This aha moment. So everything's in Markdown. So you have these trees of Markdown. Where I'd go next, and maybe for our listeners, is they're probably thinking, okay, well, you just have a giant rag against that, or maybe the models have a certain amount of context window to allow that. But what happens when you do have extremely large amounts of data? You have access to all these files. I mean, this is obviously Notion's strength. You have connectors everywhere. Maybe this takes us to the tools question in terms of how you do that. Can you walk us through a little bit more of that secret sauce?
Yeah, it is hard, and I will admit we've not like perfected it. there are cases where you can load tons and tons of content into your context window, and the model will struggle. The more context that you put into the context window, we do see a degradation in like performance, both like raw, like latency, but also like accuracy. It's sort of like you end up with like a needle in a haystack problem, and we observe that. So a couple things that we do, we keep the context, like the basic thing is just keep the context as minimal as possible. Like don't put stuff in the context window unless essentially the users explicitly ask for it to be there. Um, and then we do things like on the search side, within like the internal Notion workspace, there's just like an enormous amount of data. And so if I were to ask what's the New York Wi-Fi password, I could get like megabytes of content. Like if I were to do just like really, really basic search. So our search infrastructure is very smart. We do that vector search, we re-rank things, and then we have like a cutoff point, and then we'll only return that content, and then we can summarize that content with another LLM so that only the necessary information that was asked for is presented as context. And then another thing that we do is regularly like compact or compress your transcript. So if you're ever conversing with your agent and we start busting the context window, we can start kind of chunking and compressing um, older parts of your transcript, which is itself is sometimes error prone. Like that's like a lossy thing. We're essentially like doing a lossy compression of your past conversation. And so sometimes that doesn't work as well. And that's something we're trying to improve now.
What's the sweet spot on like so just to get into some specifics, I
Mm,
what sort of what do you see? We know that context windows can go out to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of tokens now. What
mhm.
do you guys see as like this is the sweet spot where we're putting enough context in there versus we're not overstuffing it and also costing you a lot of money, right?
We see probably in the 100 to 150,000 token limit is like kind of the sweet spot.
Right.
I I I mean, I would say less context is better. Like we don't want to just fill it up with fluff. And we do actively try to avoid that. But we've borrowed this concept that we see in other like especially like coding tools where you can like add context like manually. And so using this in Notion feels pretty natural. You can just like at mention a page, a database, a person, or whatever. Or you can even just like drop in links to things that are on the web. And then the agent will then pull in whatever that content is as context. But for example, with things like databases, you could have a database with like 100,000 pages in it. And we would not want to put that into the context window because it's going to be giant. It's going to nerf the models like next response. So we'll do things like present the like high level view of the database and some metadata about it. Like here's the columns that they have, and then here's maybe like the first 3 pages that we see, and then we have probably one of our most important tools is our like view tool, where you can view the database, you can view pages within the database. And so we'll present like the database to the agent and be like, here's some snippets about like what's in it. And there's maybe 10,000 pages in it. And here's the tools that you can use to like query it or view more things into it. And so we give the agent essentially these tools that if it wants to dig deeper and deeper, it can. But we don't like present too much information up front where it like gets confused.
Ryan, you started talking about tools, and I'm
Mm,
wondering how much of that is a key part of this. When Sam and I have been talking with a number of other companies, large enterprise companies, pretty sophisticated domain areas, whether it's in banking or health or legal, right? LexisNexis, but there's a lot of domain expertise, and so they tend to get into training models, fine tuning models, having teacher student relationships,
mhm.
a lot of pretty sophisticated stuff. Sounds like you've kind of decided not to go down that path, but really have the models reasoning over as much data as possible and then working with things like tools. Is that right? Would you agree with that? Maybe can you provide some context around how important the tool side is?
That's exactly right. The tools are essentially what makes the Notion agent what it is. The entire the entire loop of our agent is we give it some basic documentation, essentially about what Notion is, and what the user's currently doing. So we include like what page you're on, so that if somebody was like, um, "Fix my typos in this page," the agent will know what like this page is. Um, and then we just give it a list of tools with instructions and documentation, and we let it rip. We just let it pick the tools that it thinks is most appropriate. And our engineering team um, spends a lot of time trying to keep these tools as simple as possible. Because again, if we were to, in the MCP world, you might have like thousands of tools and modules and things, and the agent has to like search through all of that stuff and pick the most effective one. And so we're trying to be really careful about every new tool or even new like tool input or parameter, that like it's as minimal and as clear as possible. Like for example, we never want to have like overlapping purpose, that I could create a database, say, um, with 3 different tools. Cause then the agent has to like reason about like, okay, well, I'm on a page. Should I create a database over here and then move it? Should I create a database inline and then like set it up? Like those can just really confuse it. And in the cases that we do have sort of like overlapping functionality, we then like provide instructions about, in this scenario, you would prefer this one. These are kind of like few shot examples. In this example, you would use this tool. In this example, you would use that tool, just to give it a couple hints about how to use these things.
So I'm really curious on that, right? That we're coming up on the sort of 1 year first birthday of MCP, right? As we're
Mhm.
recording this now, it's just around the corner. I y Notion was one of the companies that jumped into MCP very early. And not only were people sort of making third party, MCPs, but Notion themselves decided to make the MCP. And I use it with the Claude app. I love that. I'm really curious, did that give you a lot of lessons that you then sort of took into, building out these agents internally? And then also how much do your internal tools match what is sort of, you're exposing as an external MCP?
Yeah, the fun fact is that like almost every tool in our MCP uses the same tool, like almost literally the same tools that our Notion AI uses. I think our MCP also it does more basically than our like internal Notion AI does. Can do more things with like comments and stuff. But all of like the core tools, the things that you can do with databases and pages, it's all shared. And there was a lot of
Did you learn from, like, watching what everyone like, what was the most popular MCP,
mm,
sort of tool or function in there? And did that sort of dictate or at least help in designing the actual Notion 3.0 agents?
it did and it didn't. We The audience for like our Notion AI and then our Notion MCP uh isn't like perfectly overlapped. Like MCP is a more technical tool. Like it is you really I mean, one, you need to know what MCP is. I could not describe to my mom what MCP is. So you've already kind of like split your audience on MCP. So like that was one thing we were deliberating with like Notion AI is like maybe this should just be MCP. But I think the barrier to entry there is a little steeper. And there's a lot of people, there's students, there's my mom, there's people that use Notion that don't want to have to think about like the setup and the configuration. And then there's power users. I use it with Claude Code and Codex myself, like the Notion MCP, and it's like phenomenal. But we need to build like a product that can work for like the everyday Notion user as well. And so we did keep that in mind, and I think what was great is we saw what worked really well on the Notion MCP, and we adopted some of those best practices. And then, like, I was talking about the page and markdown stuff with our Notion AI. We were able to innovate on that front, and then share that back to the Notion MCP, and then make the Notion MCP better. And so our teams that work on Notion AI and the Notion MCP, we collaborate pretty tightly, and are constantly sharing things that we're learning back and forth, about like what people want from these different products, and how they're using them, what works well, what doesn't work well.
This series is presented by Outshift, Cisco's emerging tech incubation engine and driver of the Internet of Agents, an open, interoperable internet for agent-to-agent collaboration. Learn more about the Internet of Agents and explore how agentic systems are the future at outshift.cisco.com.
Ryan, so again, so you joined in January and led what you called this scrappy tiger team to build this agent. And maybe we can come back to MCP here, but going back, how did you iterate and go from exploration to finding that internal product market fit where people couldn't stop using the tool, even when it was buggy? And it sounded like it was internal first, and I want to get to then maybe some data points about how it was used externally, and maybe how people are using the MCP. But could you talk a little bit about that product market fit?
We almost have this like unspoken rule about product development here that, we're big users of like internal features, like dog fooding. Um, and anytime we have an idea or a feature that is exciting, we have to convince ourselves first. We don't want to just go out to users with some half-baked idea and like run an A/B test and then like look at the data. I think there's other like products that works for, but here at Notion, we're pretty design focused. We are very critical of our own product, and so we really need to like have conviction that the thing is good before we start releasing it. And so when we were working on Notion AI, like when I first joined, we were doing all this sort of more advanced, very technical stuff, and we were finding it hard to get like product market fit internally. We found sparks of it. We found some people that were like super fans of what we were working on. And then for a lot of people, they were just like, man, this is really complicated. It's really slow. Sometimes it works. When it breaks, I'm like stuck, and I'm like having to look at like generated code, and like I can't do that. Like I don't write code. And then people were just like, kind of hitting like dead ends, and we were like, that's not a good sign. And so we did a couple revs on the way it worked, and we found like an early version of this like agentic loop. And when we shipped it internally, all of a sudden, all these people who were like maybe on the fence about like changing all the AI features were like, oh, I need this. Like I need this to work. And like honestly, because like we're so prototypey, like it was very hacked together, it was slow, it was buggy. And like the moment for us was when we started getting all these bug reports, and it's like not good that we had like bugs and like things we needed to improve, but the volume of people who were like, "Oh, I need this fixed so that I can like, um, do more revisions on my product review," or like people were just like coming to us, and it's that feeling of when the product is like being pulled out of you, rather than you trying to like push what the product should be. And like people were just coming and saying like, "Oh, the agent is not good at using this block type," or "I wish it could like do more advanced querying on the database," or "the search results aren't like super accurate." Like one example of this near like the last mile of us shipping the agent is we had an engineer who was like, "I really wish I could like customize my own agent." And he had this idea where he was like, what if we already have pages within Notion? What if I just like made a dedicated page that is like the quote unquote personality of my agent? And he just like built it, hacked it together. And then like, I will admit, I like use this. Or like I saw us talking about it and I was like, I don't know. It seems like kind of like a scrappy idea. And then I like used the early prototype and I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. I could influence the style and the tone. I could even put in like little snippets that's like, when I ask you to do X, you do Y. And then all of a sudden I'm like in my agent and without like any other keystrokes, I can be like, do X and it just like does Y. And then it was like, oh my God, this is very cool. And it like unlocks this like possibility. But like, yeah, for us, we found that spark. And then we went through the traditional like product development where we brought in some like early adopters and asking for feedback and working really tightly with them and making sure that the agent was solving problems for them. And the more and more we expanded our testing, the more people were like just pulling the product out of us. And we knew like from that moment really early on that we like had something. And to be honest, I do not know how I would ever use Notion, like, without this feature, and that's, like, me being, like, a user, and that is, to me, like, the most important thing is that I am, like, fully convinced that this is, like, a worthwhile thing to build.
Yeah, Ryan, is there, it sounds like it was kind of a steady, with very early realization that there was some traction, right? As you mentioned, I think evals are very important.
Mm.
A lot of companies talk about the importance of evals, right, for their specific domain. Hey, what do the benchmarks say? What do the metrics say? But you're saying, hey, dog fooding was essentially a big part of your evals. Actually, the vibe, the sorts of things that you're doing personally. This engineer that you refer to was that did this crazy thing, um, that then became super cool. Was it pretty much a kind of the steady acceleration, or was there any? I guess I'm curious if it was any single particular breakthrough on that, that trajectory that, looking back, you can point to as a real breakthrough through those bugs, through those issues.
I think it was really like, the markdown stuff. When we shipped that internally, it just the way the model could write got so much better. Um Not only just, like, write, but, like, reason. It was just so much simpler, for the model to be able to work. And then I think maybe also our web tooling, being able to, like, fetch contents of a website, search the internet, um, and just kind of, like, seeing all of those pieces come together. And maybe, like, a really good example is when we had one of our first moments where we saw the agent effectively chain all of these tool calls together. So to be able to like read the current page that I'm on, um, go and search the internet for some subject that I'm maybe I'm researching something, and then say like create a database, fill out all the properties, create views, and then populate the database, like essentially in one shot. Being able to ask it, like, read this page, do some research on the internet, and then set up like a task board for me to like work on, and just seeing it like scaffold all of that and get it set up for you without you like having to do all of this work bouncing between context tools and whatever. It was just kind of like mind blowing at first.
Ryan, I'm really curious. Okay, so you get this product market fit moment. And my guess is that you've also already sort of seen that in your career at Instagram with certain features or things like that, right? So it becomes really clear, like you talked about, suddenly people are pulling the product out of you rather than you trying to push it onto them. Um, where do you go from here with that? So clearly you've got something that's working really well. My guess is you're now being bombarded with, like, 500 things of people saying, "Hey, but I also want X and Y and Z," and, all these sorts of things. How do you sort of clarify that like the whole sort of curation aspect of sort of saying, yeah, no, 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 okay, we're just going to focus on this, or we're just going to nail these key features?
That is incredibly challenging, because, yeah, we have a really diverse population of users from, like I was saying, from students to parents, people running their home office or like a church on Notion to Fortune 500 companies that are running their projects and knowledge base and whatnot on Notion. And so that is hard to figure out like what to do, because you've got the requests from those different levels of customer are wildly different. So we have to do a little bit of constant like reprioritizing within there. And then internally, we have ideas, things that we want to try, things that we want to experiment. And we certainly don't want to ignore innovation. One thing that we're constantly doing, we have a group of folks here who are on like the bleeding edge of AI research and technology. They're constantly following what the frontier labs are doing and releasing and talking about, so that we are prepared when new ideas and new paradigms come around. We don't want to be left behind. We want to take advantage of new things and at least try them and see how it fits within Notion. We also have to listen to our customers and figure out what they need. But it is a challenge. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to be really careful about is like, what's the saying that if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail or whatever. And when people ask for new features, it's like, boy, we could just like add a tool to the model or to our agent and let it do that. Um, and that to me is a little bit of a slippery slope, because the more tools that we add, the more decisions and the more options the model has to make. I mean, it's just the same way as like us. Like when I go to a restaurant, one of my biggest pet peeves is when I go to like a restaurant and they give me like the Cheesecake Factory menu, where it's like, here's 20 pages of like food that you could order. And I'm like, ugh, what do I what do I actually want? My ideal is like I go to a place and it's like, here's 4 dishes and you get to pick. They're all excellent, but you have to pick between those 4. And I'm like, perfect. I know I will have a great time. And so that's like the way we want to design our tools, is like we want the very like curated menu. So we have to be really careful of that, but we also, don't want to limit the functionality of the agent. Like something we're working on right now, we just released the ability for the agent to read comments that are within pages or databases, which we didn't launch with initially. It was probably our most requested feature. And so that one made sense because so many people were asking for it, that pull of the product. But then it comes to other more like nuanced stuff, and perhaps it's a job better suited for MCP. So if there's a more technical advanced feature that people need, maybe we can, like folks on our support team can work with that customer to figure out how to solve their problem without necessarily adding a tool. Um, I will say like currently our biggest focus is like reliability and performance. Notion is a very complicated, uh, the like structure and blocks and databases. It's very complicated for the agent. So we have to give the agent lots of instructions and lots of documentation. We have to, uh, we have like different models have like different layers or levels of like thinking that you can give it. And we're on like the higher level of reasoning and thinking whenever we're calling OpenAI or Anthropic. And that can feel slow sometimes when you're just like, fix this typo and it's sitting there for like 10 seconds, like thinking about how to do that. So we're trying to figure out ways to make this feel a lot snappier, a lot lighter. Um, and then we're also working on custom agents, which is not fully shipped yet, but that is also built on our entire agentic loop. And so making sure that that works, that's performant. That is a whole other suite of complexities and things to worry about. But it's showing immense promise.
Yeah, Brian, the reliance on tools is a big one, and I'm thinking about our listeners here who are probably thinking through, okay, how best to do it. I could definitely relate to the confusion that we keep hearing that agents have with a long list of tools. there's a Mediterranean place in not far where I can walk in and okay, you got to choose the protein, you got to choose the carb, you got to choose this, or you don't have to do that choosing. You could do this or you could do that. And it's like, and so I think agents are going to be smarter than probably me, but you still have that confusion. So I'm wondering, you talked about performance being a big one in terms of ranking. I
Mhm.
think on the tool side, what tools you use. You can't just add another tool. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what tools are emerging as big ones, or what bucket tools are emerging, or what classification or other practices are big?
Yeah, our page tool is still probably, like, the most used, to both, like, read and write to pages, and because Notion has I can't remember how many, like, different block types we have, but it's so many. It's, like, over 100, I think. Um, each of those tools has to be, like, hand maintained on, like, how we represent it to the model and then how the model can, like, write back to it. So that's hard. We gotta go through the laundry list of all these things and make sure they work. So we spend a lot of time doing that because it's, like, the most used tool. And then we have our databases that, we allow people to query them, generate them. They can add views to them. And our views can be pretty complicated if you've ever been in like chart views options in Notion. There's all the different types of charts that you can display, and then the colors and the formatting, things that you show and don't show. And we want to represent all of that to the agent reasonably so that it can like work with that. We spend a lot of time just kind of doing the like, here's all the things that you can do in Notion. Let's make sure that the agent can do it reasonably well. And then sort of like finding the balance of like, if we let it do too much, it's like more mistakes that it can make. It's more confused that it can get. So we have to be like pretty careful of that.
So I'm really kind of curious, right? You've got all these you've got these in-house sort of tools and stuff like that that you're building, yet you're using these models from Anthropic, from OpenAI and stuff like that. At the same time, they are kind of looking at all these products like Notion and thinking like, oh, we could also have that tool. We could also do that kind of thing. So you've really got this kind of frenemy thing, right? Where you're kind of friends with them on one way sense, but did you got to feel at times like you've got a target on your back that perhaps Anthropic wants to come after the enterprise area of Notion. OpenAI wants to come after the consumer side of that. How do you guys think about that?
I'll start by saying we have really great relationships with the frontier labs. Yeah, they do look to us as like product people. And then obviously we look to them as like the AI experts. I see both Anthropic and OpenAI are innovating on the product side alongside their models and building things in the B2B space, the consumer space, and whatnot. And I think that we don't necessarily want to go toe to toe with these huge labs. I mean, they're extremely talented, they're well funded. Um, we believe our unique value is this collaborative space. This is in the like soul of Notion, and it's how Notion works. And so that is, I think, what we are leaning into the most. We do not want like we're not going to build a Notion version of like Chat GPT. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. We want Notion AI to be like our marketing push is like that. These are teammates, and we really want them to feel like teammates, where I can bring them into my workspace and either automate work or multitask things, or bring like expertise to a task or to my work. And less so like we're not gonna make a Notion generated video app or something.
I
That
guess
that wouldn't be too good.
I guess more what I meant though was like, do you feel the pressure to sort of develop your own secret sauce that is not
Mm.
model dependent, that's sort of like stuff that they would have to think, gee, how are they doing that with our models? we're not sure, right? Kind of thing. I, like on one hand, obviously they can, sort of get a sense of what traffic is coming into their models. But it sounds like your whole middleware is really interesting in that sort of sense. And I'm curious, like, do you, is there an active conversation going on of like, hey, why don't we try and develop something that's, really unique to us?
Yeah, I that is mostly how we approach this. Like one thing, it reminds me of my time at Instagram. We were pretty weary to like vendor lock-in. There of course would be tools and products and APIs that would be Android specific and Apple specific, and we would like to take advantage of those things. But we would never want to build the core product around a single operating system's capability. And the way that applies to Notion is, I think the different vendors have like their own kind of like here's a good example, like text replacement tools. Or they're now even coming out with like their own sort of like agentic tools. And like we don't want to overfit to one like vendor's API because that could change. The other vendor could come out with like a model that is like pretty exciting, and we want to like experiment with that. But if we've like overfit for, um, the way one model behaves or a tool that it has, we'll kind of like have cornered ourselves. Um, and I think the other thing that we've learned over the last year is that, like with all this like discovery that the models work really well with Markdown, it's like we just kind of want to figure out and learn what these models are really good at, and then figure out how to apply them to Notion, and to the problems that our users have within Notion and the way like the Notion system works. And so, yeah, we spend almost all of our engineering effort on that middleware, and our AI like researchers and experts are the ones that are figuring out like, oh, this model's like now becoming really good at this new technology or this new technique, and then we'll find a way to like apply that into Notion and in a very like Notion specific way.
Do you, as you go through this, do you sort of actively plot and plan that, okay, part of our agent will go for this model first, then we'll go for another model, so we never let any vendor actually see the full sort of, what's going on there?
No,
No?
no, we're not. We're we're pretty open, both about like product and like what we're trying to do with the models, because the frontier labs are also trying to push the boundaries as well. And so we're frequently sharing like learnings about things that are working or not working. It really does feel like a rising tides lift all boats sort of moment.
So Ryan, I'm hearing you. I I I, I want to follow up though on, Sam Altman's been big about, hey, watch out, don't develop in the roadmap of OpenAI because we're going to steamroll you, right? Don't build a wrapper that can easily be wiped out by us. And when I saw them roll out OpenAI recently, the apps in
Hmm.
ChatGPT, right? Hey, you're now within my ChatGPT feed. I can link to all these specialists, right? So you noticed in their launch, they have these specialists, these domain experts. So travel was a big one, right? Expedia,
Hmm.
Booking.com. You can go straight to your accounts from OpenAI and fiddle around there. Um, for housing, Zillow, Coursera, right? You could do banking. All those folks feel safe, right? Those folks with the domain expertise, it's very different. Um, book, I think Notion sounds like it's very dangerously in the roadmap recently, and I'm not sure if it's obviously on purpose. I think this stuff obviously came about relatively recently, where Sam is now talking more about being an assistant, right? He's talking about even a
Hmm.
hardware device. And so maybe it wasn't by design, but it feels like it's becoming awfully close. So are you sure you have something, maybe, I don't know if you can articulate what the differentiation is, because it certainly feels like they have that connection tissue that they want to drive me anywhere. And maybe second, I would just say, do you feel like OpenAI has provided a clear roadmap, clear enough for folks like you? Like and I'm just wondering what you're taking away from that.
I definitely don't have any insight into OpenAI's roadmap. They launch new stuff that I'm like, you were doing what? All the time, which I think is cool. I think it's very cool to watch. Um, I do think, to me, Notion's in a very sweet spot where, like, our expertise is the, like, multi-peer, real-time collaborative workspace. Um, and I don't have a doubt in my mind that, other folks, and Notion is not the only, like, multiplayer, um, B2B workspace app out there either. But I don't have any doubt in my mind that OpenAI or Anthropic could build something pretty great. But Notion has over a decade of experience in the space, and not just on product and engineering, but also like trust with companies and customers and users. And so we've developed quite a lot of expertise in that. And we don't necessarily want to like reframe Notion as only AI. Like to us, we are using AI to like solve these collaborative issues for people. And so, yeah, I don't think that I would see us ever going like toe to toe with OpenAI. Who knows? This industry changes like every other day. I'm kind of like chuckling because when you were talking about plans, because we were recently having an internal conversation about like somebody asked me like what our AI team's roadmap is, and I'm like, I can tell you what we're doing until like Friday. And that's like it. And that's very much like by design because opportunities come up so fast, new models drop, new prototypes show promise, new problems pop up with our infrastructure. And so we're kind of like constantly pivoting and chasing those new things. So yeah, it's like we're always kind of like on our heels and like ready to pivot and react.
Ryan, good point. Is there one specific area you feel relatively confident that you think you have a dominant position in that's defensible in this overall area of context?
I think that our like search and connection is like world class. It is by far what I use Notion AI for. I love being able to like write documents, edit documents, and manage databases. But on its own, I think it would be like a nice feature. But when I can combine that with the context and retrieval that we've got, in addition to the like within Notion, like the years and years of content and information from all of these different connections that we use, like really sort of like um, is the yeah the value to me. Like for example, when I onboarded here, it was like one of the best onboardings ever because instead of having to like have an onboarding buddy that I'm like constantly peppering with questions, I just am like asking Notion AI, how do I do this? Where do I find this? Or like, why was this decision made? And it can go back like 5 years in time and be like, here is where like, Ivan wanted to try feature X and then we shipped it or whatever. And that's like so useful. And also like that information doesn't always have to be crystallized within Notion. That conversation could have happened in Slack 2 years ago, and Notion AI would just whoop go and find it. It really just comes down to like, to me, like product and taste and execution. And it's ultimately like why I joined Notion with my co-founders because we like love the product. We love the like level of taste. It doesn't feel like we're just cramming every feature that we could possibly think of. We're very, very critical and have a very high bar for what we actually ship and how polished it is.
That definitely seems to be a theme across a lot of the sort of people who are adopting AI, is that this really is about curation, about taste. And I think Notion is definitely seen as a tastemaker. I'm curious, sort of now as we're sort of starting to wind up, What advice do you have for other companies that are sort of getting into this, that are in that position of where maybe they've got some kind of, data, some kind of context. They're trying to provide better products for their customers. They're a bit intimidated by OpenAI, sort of saying that they're going to get steamrolled. What's your sort of take on it? And sort of, if someone was sort of sitting next to you in the bar and they tell you, hey, we're just starting out, like, you know, give us the secret sauce.
Um, a couple things that come to mind is like the first is just you just got to channel the model. Like just use the APIs the way they were meant to be used. Don't try to be fancy. Don't try to overcomplicate it. Use plain English. Like I mentioned, if a new hire, if I could present my prompt or my instructions to a new hire and they can generally understand it, that's like what you should be shooting for. Just like keep it very simple. What's nice is that that sort of maps to just like traditional engineering best practices too. I've seen abstractions and frameworks and code that are just like PhD level complexity, and like my eyes like glaze over when I'm trying to like read, some code or whatever. And that's like a good kind of like smell test of like maybe something's actually overly complex. And the same goes for working with LLMs. Like just keep it simple. Um, and then I think the other part is like you just gotta try stuff. Um, I would also recommend like don't invest in evals really soon. Like just be very vibey. Like just try things and feel it. To me, evals are once you've got a sense of like product market fit and you want to like hone in on the accuracy, the quality, the latency or whatever. I would not start with like evals to do exploratory product work. Like pre-product market fit, I would not bother with evals. I would just very much like, yeah, use vibes.
Interesting. So what to get that product market fit, what do you sort of like how okay, if you're sort of encouraging people not to use evals, because it's kind of interesting because a lot of other people we're listening to are sort of saying evals, 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 but you make a really nice point that the evals probably don't help that much when you're exploring. What are the key sort of things for exploring?
It's kind of just classic product development
Right.
to me. Like, how much are people using your thing? Retention, 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 retention. If people are constantly using your AI feature, you've nailed it. And I'm a big believer in like build things that solve your problems. That's hard. It depends on the space. If I'm building a AI feature for lawyers. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how any of that works. So that would be really challenging for me. And that's more of like a career life lesson is like I feel like people should work in spaces that they're super passionate and knowledgeable about. And so like for me, working at Notion's great because I like productivity tools. I like being productive. And so I'm going to build tools that like do that for me. But yeah, that's it. I don't think there's anything necessarily unique about, the other thing I would mention is like really early on in product development is like, don't worry about costs. Don't worry about how much you're spending, or like on AI development. Don't worry about how cost effective your AI feature is yet. Like those things can be optimized later. And especially if you've built something that is incredibly valuable to people that you should like have a pricing structure that reflects that value as well, that doesn't put you underwater. I early in our previous startup, I think we were like really precious about how cost effective like our LLM features were. And it's like, well, 20 people use it, so who cares? You got to earn the right to like optimize the price and the margins.
Right. Over the summer, we had our flagship conference, and Andrew Ng came to speak, and he was really big on this notion of being fast, right? That we needed over the summer. I think we still were in this kind of environment that speed was necessary. We're early. and multiple other people chimed in agreement. It's to the point where he was saying, yeah, evals, um, even guardrails, security. You got to prototype, get some things out there, then kind of build that redundancy. But I want to come back to something I think you've mentioned a couple of times, which is this culture, right? And you talked about being an Instagram, and Kevin Nystrom was I think became famous for just perfecting the icon corners. There are many um, sharing apps and photo sharing, image sharing apps at the time, but they broke through with that taste that you're talking about. And you talked about Notion actually not shipping, throwing tools as fast as possible, slowing down perhaps, and actually caring about what you put out there. Are we still in the era of speed? I mean, kind of moving forward, or are we in the era of slowing down?
I think we're still in the era of speed. And it is challenging to be like craftspeople that have a really high bar for polish and then be in a space that like is moving at breakneck speed. So you have for us, we have to straddle the line of holding a high bar while not like slowing ourselves down. And that's pretty hard. And so sometimes we will have to be a little bit more tolerant of bugs, glitches, like whatever. We're never gonna willingly like ship a bug. But sometimes if the agent has uh, we have this like a bit of air cover that like AI is non-deterministic. And so like I think there's a higher level of like tolerance for it being like quirky and weird than there would be in like traditional software. Like the Instagram point is a great example. Like we had such a high bar because we could control every single pixel of it. With AI, we can't control as much. Yeah, even though Frontier Labs like don't necessarily know how these things work under the hood. And so that gives us a bit of air cover to be a little experimental. But at the same time, there are some principles that we just hold really dearly. Like one is permissions. We care very much about how we respect your permissions and permissions of content and people within your workspace. We never want to leak content. We want to be aware of the dangers of fetching content from the internet. If the agent is ever changing content on your behalf, we want you to have a one-click way to undo that and restore what it did or see what it did. So, there's some places that we could be a little faster and looser, and then there's some areas where we're like, nope, like this is a red line that we're not going to cross. We never want to make people's content irrecoverable or leaked.
Where do you go from here? Like you've done a bunch of stuff. It's been a really interesting conversation. I'm really kind of curious to see, and not just for you and for personally for Notion, but like where do you think as an industry we sort of go from here?
Yeah, it's a pretty weird time. I don't know what things are going to look like in a year, let alone like 5 years.
Do you think like everyone's been talking about, or I guess earlier in the year, everyone was talking about 2025 being the year of agents. It's kind of, I think Karpathy mentioned that it's the kind of probably the decade of agents, which seems to make more sense to me. Is the future agents, right? Do you sort of foresee that like a lot of this stuff is going to be agents rolling out?
We're experimenting a lot with, obviously, with agents. I think that custom agent bet is very exciting because this adds another layer of like autonomy to our like Notion agents, and so we're really excited about that. Um, I agree with Carpathy. I think it's a decade of agents. I think his point about like every 9 of reliability taking an enormous, like the same amount of effort, I think is completely true. I've seen it firsthand with what we're doing on Notion AI. Where we've got things like pretty stable, but that last like few percent, in some tool error rate or whatever, it's really hard to nail because there is no like silver bullet. It is a bunch of small things that you have to fix. And then a new model will come out and have its own quirks and like things that you have to patch. So that is like really challenging, but fun. It's like a fun challenge. What I'm most excited about is like extending. model capabilities and modality. I am not wholly convinced that the future is chat boxes. I think there's a lot more interesting stuff going on. I'm really excited about all these companies building like AI browsers, not just a pop up in the side where I can like chat with the web page, but automation and like more context aware about like what I'm doing. AI is essentially like with you and available at all time and has more and more and more context. I think that's for us at Notion what we're um, investing a lot in right now is like the more context, the more information, the better the AI is going to perform. So like, how can we give it more context?
Ryan, again, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much for sharing. You did intrigue me though, by ending on customized agents. Can you just give us this, maybe a preview or an outline of the types of things that are coming down moving forward? Is this maybe more relevant for the enterprise, or are you talking about more for the assistant in terms of, or the assistant for the individual?
I do think it solves problems for both. I would say that enterprises and well, just companies will probably see the immediate value from custom agents. Like for instance, we're using it to power our IT departments, our help desk departments. It's helping our sales groups, our customer support groups. For an example, we have like an IT channel in Slack, and you can ask a question about, oh, my computer's acting up, or I need a new cable for my monitor. And our bot will reply either and pull information like from our help docs from previous requests. And then if it can't answer your question, it'll file a ticket for our IT team to then go look into. They'll look into it and then handle your thing. Where previously that was like either a person in Slack constantly monitoring that stuff, or another like app or service that we had to manage that was like kind of doing that and not as deeply integrated as Notion is. But I've also seen a bunch of great like personal productivity uses for it. Something that I started doing is I have a custom agent that is like my work journal. And so at the end of every single day, it like looks across my Slack channels, my pull requests, my documents. We have meeting notes within Notion, so it can see all the meetings that I was in. It sucks up all of that context and it writes like a little 10-point blurb about like, here's the things Ryan did today. And then it stuffs that into a database that becomes like my journal. I like kind of journaling. I like kind of keeping tabs on what I do. I can be so busy that I like forget all the minutia of like the things we did and accomplished. And so now instead of me having to take time and like go and write that every single day, I just have a custom agent that plops a new page into this database, and I can review it if I want or not. Or I can do even like more meta, summarization over the month of November. What all did I do? And all that information is there.
Fascinating. The whole conversation has been very fascinating, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us on the pod. We certainly learned a lot. It's very interesting to hear what a startup like Notion is doing. And thank you for being so open about, a number of the different topics of how you've actually sort of built this experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Thank you, Ryan.
And special thanks to our presenting sponsor, Outshift by Cisco. You can learn more about their work on the Internet of Agents via their Linux Foundation project, agntcy.org. This open source project enables agents to work at scale across any vendor or framework with trusted and secure discovery, identity access, and observability. For more stories about the AI revolution, like and subscribe to the podcast and check out VentureBeat.com to sign up for our newsletters.